welcome, gentlemen. You've got water down the side, you've got mics on your ears, so you don't need hand mics. So just tell us a little bit about, I presume most people have heard of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but want to just give you 1 minute each, because we haven't got a huge amount of time, just to tell us about yourselves and what it is that your organizations do. So Costa, why don't you kick off?
Yeah, hi, good morning. Costa Peric, I'm Deputy Director in what we call the Financial Services for the Poor strategy at Gates. As the name implies, it's about financial inclusion, connecting the estimated 1.7 billion people still unbanked today across the planet to some form of financial system. Yeah.
And Ben?
I'm the CEO of a company called Dwolla, which is based in the United States. What we do is we connect our customer software to banking infrastructure. So generally speaking, I've spent the last 10 years working really hard to build a single unified API that connects any piece of software to all United States banks all at once. It's been an interesting ride so far.
Okay, and for those of you who are wondering, Ben, Dwolla is called Dwolla because?
It's the two words web and dollar. We move dollars with the web.
There we go, as simple as that. I thought it was like a really clever word in another language or something. It's not a clever word, but you know. So, you know, we often get people on stage because they kind of disagree with each other. We're going to get a bit of conflict. It's going to be, you know, interesting to see them go head to head. But you guys actually work together on financial inclusion. So what is it that you actually do, and why is it important? Ben, why don't you kick off?
Dwolla over time has gotten really good at infrastructure, specifically ledgers that keep track of money at scale that connect to multiple different parties or connect to multiple different parties and geographies and currencies simultaneously. So we contributed to the central services of the Mojaloop project, which was something we were very excited to do. And thankfully, Costa and the team have done a great job now getting the product out globally and getting it integrated with large banks and large telecoms in a way that little old Dwolla probably wouldn't be able to. I shouldn't say we would not be able to.
And Kostas, this is the program that you're leading to help interoperability between different payment platforms.
So the challenge in financial inclusion today that we need to overcome is not anymore the feasibility of providing financial services to the poor. We know that works. In Africa today, there is more than 250 mobile money operations, and we know they work. We have just recently commissioned a study that showed how mobile money in Kenya has helped 200,000 households emerge from poverty. So the challenge today is to scale this across Africa and South Asia. And to do that, the next barriers to overcome is really interoperability. Most of these operations today tend to require the sender and receiver of money to be connected on the same system. So the challenge is interoperability. That's why we, among other things, we have commissioned the development of this software that's now open source. It's called Mojaloop, that provides a super efficient platform to process in real time low-value payments.
So you mentioned, Costa, that mobile money has helped lift, just in Kenya, 200,000 people out of poverty. Do you have any hard data on how Mojaloop is doing, or how much it's helped, again, using that kind of benchmark?
I will give you, we don't have yet, but what I can tell you is that recently Orange, who is one key provider of mobile money in Africa, and MTN, another one, have created a joint venture called Mowali that has been announced very recently. They have chosen to use Mojaloop as a technology to interconnect all of their operations together. So it's quite exciting.
And we've heard already today, we heard Anne Cairns from MasterCard talking about it, also Managing Director of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, discussing financial inclusion. I think Anne Cairns was saying that you know, there's no point having the Internet of Things if it's not for everyone. And also and Christine Lagarde's talking about, you know what, it's not just good from an altruistic perspective, but it's really good business, because there's a huge market out there just waiting for fintechs to kind of develop products that not only help them, but also will ultimately help these fintechs make money as well. Is that a message that you kind of First of all, do you find that, Ben? And is that a message that you perhaps collectively try to get out more to get more fintechs involved?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because for developers to access banking infrastructure globally is actually a fairly difficult thing. You need to go into a bank and you need to socially negotiate to get access to that thing. So there's still a lot of technology to be built just to open up the systems to be inclusive of new ideas. And what I mean by being inclusive of new ideas means opening up the infrastructure so developers can start building new experiences. A lot of the people in this room are utilizing experiences with money that didn't exist 20 years ago, which is kind of interesting. However, in emerging markets, people might not have access to that or banks at all yet. So when you start with how do we provide the technology to include people in the banking system in the first place, but also build it in a way where software developers can get access to it really quickly, I mean, I don't know that we've necessarily experienced the shift yet, but I think we will. I think it will change banking on a global level.
Costa?
Yeah, I think the other important point of financial inclusion that we see governments and central banks push for is because financial inclusion, besides helping the poor get out of poverty, has actually a very important economic contribution to the country's economy. Another study we have sponsored recently, which I urge you to have a look at, by McKinsey, has estimated the benefit for various economies if everyone was connected. And we can see in some countries that the GDP increase could go double-digit increase if this happens. So it's a huge economic enablement for countries as well. So.
And I'm glad you mentioned government, because when you are working in these countries, do they help? Do they just step aside and say, welcome, we need all the help that we can get? Or do they actually put up barriers to make your lives difficult?
Yeah. My testimonial is that we work perhaps in majority, we work with governments and central banks because they have the power to enable a countrywide project to happen. And they have key drivers to do so. The central banks, their key driver remains to monitor and safeguard the economy as it becomes digital, so it's very important for them to be involved. Governments, because of the economic benefit. And then, as you rightly said, and I keep saying this, this is not about charity, in fact. This is about enabling a new wave of service providers to step in and serve the poor at a benefit for them. But it's a different model, obviously.
And Ben, I mean, were you kind of easy to convince to do this kind of thing? Does it take a lot of knocking on doors, or as soon as Costa turns up, you say, great, count me in?
You know, I might be unique in that I've spent so much time working on real-time ledger infrastructure that is designed to be agnostic. I don't know how many people in the room have spent like 5 or 10 years on that particular problem, but when somebody like Costa or the Gates Foundation or Global Bank pops up and says, hey, we'd like to work on this thing with you, that's kind of an exciting project for me. So I was probably an easy sell.
Yeah. And forgive me, this is a not for, you're doing this kind of free of charge? This is like a pro bono thing, or you actually get paid for this?
We have not done everything free of charge. As Costa said, there is economic benefit for businesses to contribute. There are parts that we do free of charge and pieces that we will also continue to utilize as a part of the open source project, which is, I think, is a really unique thing about Mojaloop, is this is actually available as open source. So many financial institutions have created ledger infrastructures or core systems that are very hard to access. In this particular case, you have companies and a lot of time and money and investment that have basically contributed to this project. You can pull off the shelf and just get to work and use it, which is really unique, and we're looking at how to utilize that in the United States as well.
Okay, and Ben, I think I saw from your website that you know, you say that it's not just important about including potential customers or people in, whether it's in poorer countries or richer countries, in terms of financial inclusion, but actually it's important to include them in building the fintechs that could service them.
Oh, for sure. A lot of technology is difficult for people globally to access. Depending on where you live, what country you speak, you might not actually be able to sign up for a developer account in the United States or anywhere in Europe because of where you're at. So even building technologies like sandboxes that are open for a developer who might be 13 years old in Nairobi to start building software because they have a command line interface, I think that's a really important shift and a way we should start thinking about things.
And Costa, is kind of inspiring, in entrepreneurship in
Yeah.
tech in these countries also a part of what this is all about?
So I'm really glad that you asked the question. So the way this works is in the mental model that we follow. So if you have a digital payment platform that is super efficient and capable of processing billions of transactions of few cents, that gives rise to a huge amount of innovation in terms of what you can put on top of this platform. One example, in Eastern Africa, there are some companies like M-Kopa that sell solar batteries to poor households. The expense of a solar battery would be comparable to like a car for a European household, so it's a big expense. And so what they do is they sell it as a lease to the household, and they pay back with $0.50 or even $0.25 amount back every day, using mobile money, using digital payments. So that enables a huge amount of benefits for this household. First of all, eventually they will own the battery, which is an asset. They will have built their history, so they will have better history and assessment for further people wanting to invest in them. If they can't pay one particular day the battery will stop. It'll just shut down. And that's okay, because that particular day, maybe the household has to pay the school tuition fee for one of the childs. They'll pay tomorrow. So this also shows something that I think is perhaps for the audience here, when it hits, it's going to be huge, is this capacity for the internet to process huge amounts of very small payments, so that you don't have to, if you want to like read an article in your newspaper, you don't have to subscribe for a week of that newspaper. You can actually pay a few cents for that particular article, and so forth. So this is a huge amount of innovation enablement in the near future.
Okay, and Costa, I also want to ask you, I was reading a recent article from, I guess your boss, ultimately, Bill Gates, in the Wall Street Journal earlier this month, talking about how investments in healthcare provided far and away the best bang for his buck in terms of social and economic benefits. So my question is, as a logical person, why doesn't he just put all of his money into healthcare? Why financial inclusion? What I mean is, if you get so much more benefit by putting all the money into healthcare, then why start dabbling in these other things?
Okay, think very simple. So there is, as we discussed, benefit in financial inclusion itself. But think about health. So you have to go out and pay health workers to provide vaccines for polio in Africa. Well, you have to pay them. So digital payments.
So they're kind of, it can come under the same umbrella.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. And of course, financial inclusion isn't just about poorer countries. I think the World Bank reckons there's some 2.5 billion unbanked people in the world, and something like 40 million in the EU, and even the same amount in Brazil. Some fintechs are helping with access to financial services, but often the terms, interest rates, and the like are also prohibitively high. I mean, should banking, whether it's in the rich world or in the poor world, be more of a utility that absolutely everyone has access to? And I mean, I know obviously in poorer countries, not many people have access to utilities. But in general, should banking be like a utility that everybody should have access to it because it's that vital and central to everybody's lives?
I think everybody should have access to it, for sure. And I think that early entrance into a market, we were talking about this earlier, like in Africa, the price started really high, and a lot of competition kind of on a per transaction basis brought the price down. And so what we end up seeing is that as markets adopt new technologies, more people get into them, and then it kind of drives the price down. And that's kind of, they started to be treated more like a utility. It's interesting because I think where things really start to get interesting is probably not so much on that side, but probably more on the regulatory side, and certainly around AML and BSA and some of those complexities that need to be accounted for. But certainly everyone should have access.
Costa?
Yeah, before joining the Gates Foundation, I spent a good chunk of my career at Swift. I actually architected the network, and Swift is a utility for high-value payments for banks. What I think we are talking about here is really a utility for small-value retail real-time payments, on top of which then competitive fintechs or services can be built upon. And access to this utility should be seamless, should be pervasive and inclusive. Yeah, that's what this is all about. Yeah.
And is it really just fintechs that can help here? I mean, you've asked Ben, I'm sure Ben's, obviously technology is great and the best for the job, but I mean, could you not have gone to HSBC or Barclays or Bank of America and said, hey guys, got this great project, why don't you help us?
We did.
And they said no.
And no, they didn't say no. They so what you have to understand, and I heard in some previous panels the same discussion. It's not easy for a large incumbent bank to shift all at once its business model to go from, the middle and high pyramid they serve, then shift their attention to the bottom of the pyramid. I mean, innovation in that sense has to do with if say the boss of the bank says you shall do this, you will notice that as it percolates down the ranks, this order will be diluted because everyone there have their KPIs and so on. So it's very difficult. One advice I always give to incumbent banks is to create, and we heard the word sandboxes. I wrote a book about it on how to create how to try a new business model outside of the normal one, because if you try to force your normal rank and file to do something, it'll not work. So we tried. Sometimes it succeeded, most of the time not. So we really look at other people who can step in and who understand how to serve the poor, fintechs, telcos, digital banks, and we harness as much as possible of this collective power. But I always say everyone should be on deck, so we welcome incumbent banks, of course, as well.
Okay, so if there are any banks CEOs in the audience, then come and chat to Costa afterwards.
Yeah.
Just want to ask you, Ben, we've heard a bit about cybersecurity and cyber being a really big risk, and obviously a lot of I would imagine mainly have in mind their markets, which are mainly middle income or richer countries. When it comes to poorer countries, I mean, is it kind of foolproof when someone's got their mobile wallet, whether they're on M-Pesa or whatever they're using, where they're using Mojaloop? Is it really hard for things to hack? Because surely as these things get more take-up, there's going to be more opportunity or more reason for people to try to take that money.
I think it's always good to be wary of anyone who thinks about sort of risk and fraud in the context of foolproof, because there's always an attack vector somewhere. And certainly, we worked on some of the forensic logging services around the central ledger as a part of the Mojaloop project. So we've thought a lot about this in the context of, is the identity authorized, and is the authorized identity the actual identity interacting with the system? And what is the probability that that instruction should go through, which actually starts to look like how DNS works and how packets are prioritized, but in the context of payments. So I think that, again, we need to start thinking about risk and fraud in a slightly different context in systems like this. But unfortunately, none of the systems will be foolproof. Someone will attack it, new rules will be built around it, and react to that, sometimes by regulatory mandate, and sometimes because a technologist is thankfully paying close attention.
But Costa, I assume it is an issue. Christine Lagarde, again, she was talking about one of the most, in a Peruvian village, this woman whose life has been transformed because she's got her payment card and her mobile phone, and therefore she's less likely to be robbed by bandits in and around the village. So if you're not being physically robbed because you're using technology, is that a real danger for poorer countries?
So you have, it's a complex question.
You've got 30 seconds to answer.
For sure, for people having changing from having cash on them to having a phone with a PIN code to authorize access to the cash is a huge change and benefits in many ways. And so I think that's a given. We have observed this. I think where you have to really be careful is on a system level, in a country, with things related to money laundering and fraud. So we are talking about deploying digital payment platforms real time, but they have to be supervised and they have to be comply to law. And I think there is a big challenge because digital enables a lot, but digital also enables misuse. And so there is a huge amount of attention on making sure to increase fraud detection and management in digital payment systems. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you very much to Costa and Ben for this panel on financial inclusion.
Thank you.
Thank you.